My guest is Janice Stein. She's head of the Monk Center at the University of Toronto. Welcome to the show, Janice.
And it's now the Monk School of Global Affairs,
That's
Howard,
right.
after a wonderful gift, and it's
wonderful.
an exciting time for us.
Very exciting. You pulled off a magnificent coup, I must say.
Well, it's wonderful for the country that we will finally have a professional school of global affairs.
Well, you'll be among the foremost schools in North America. I think you almost are,
We
actually,
will
from
be.
my opinion.
We will be. We will
Okay,
be.
but to the topic. We're going to do just war this time. Now, the Goldstone report has clearly raised the whole issue of just war again. What's your summary assessment of the Goldstone report and its impact?
The Goldstone report to me is deeply flawed and deeply frustrating. It's deeply flawed because the way it collected evidence, the standards for evidence, don't meet, even by Justice Goldstone's own admission, criteria that would be acceptable in any court. And so therefore the conclusions he draws in the report go way beyond the quality of the evidence that he has. But that's not my frustration with it, although frankly we have a right to expect better when we have judges of his quality leading an inquiry. But that's not my frustration. My real frustration with this report is it didn't engage with the question of how just war theory applies to wars that dominated the last quarter of the 20th century and are likely to be the predominant kind of war in the future.
These are asymmetric
These
wars.
are asymmetric wars.
And how do you characterize, how would you
So what's an
assess it?
asymmetric war? That the word asymmetry, you may think it means asymmetry of power. In the case of Israel-Palestine, that Israel is so much more powerful than Palestine. That's actually not what it means. It means asymmetry of form. So it is usually between a state and a non-state actor. One army wears uniforms and would be recognizable to somebody from the 17th or 18th century. The others are militias, irregulars, paramilitary, don't wear uniforms, and in fact, deliberately as a strategy, and it's an effective strategy, merge with the civilian population. If you think of the core of just war theory, there's two parts to it. First, is the war just? Let's leave that aside for a moment. But secondly, how do you conduct the war? And the crucial question that all just war theorists wrestle with is civilians. How do you manage to minimize civilian deaths? Well, this kind of warfare is fought on a civilian battlefield, in cities, in streets, in jungles. It's fought with militias who are themselves dressed as civilians, who embed themselves among civilians. This raises a host of normative issues that just war theory, as we know it, Howard, doesn't really deal with. The Goldstone Commission, that was the opportunity to take just war theory from the 20th century into the 21st. There's not a whiff of it in the Commission report.
But one other thing, leaving aside the Goldstone Commission and its total inadequacies, one other issue about the form of just war and asymmetrical war is they fight for different strategies with the international community in mind, that I think is different. The more powerful state has to inflict enough damage to inhibit the other side, but can't defeat the other side because of the norms we have internationally. But can't do so much damage that it'll be totally condemned by the international community. And the weaker side, in that sense, the discrepancy of force matters, has to be willing to take enough damage, but not enough that they're totally demoralized, but enough to appeal to the international community. So it complicates the civilian casualties, because they have to multiply their civilian casualties. The stronger power has to minimize them.
That's right. I think you're right, but I would frame it a little different. I
How would you
agree with you.
yeah.
I
No,
fundamentally
I would like
agree
to
with
hear how
you,
you
but I would
say it.
reframe it a little bit. At the core of the strategies of both are civilian casualties, right? So as you said, for the state actor or the stronger actor, the whole strategy is to succeed, inflict punishment, but only at a level of tolerable civilian casualties, because if it's too high, you lose legitimacy. Right. So civilian casualties are at the core of their strategy managing that. For the weaker party, you need to suffer enough civilian casualties. Otherwise, you don't achieve the international attention that you're seeking. So for them, actually, increasing the number of civilian casualties is their strategy.
That's exactly right.
So a way of seeing this kind of warfare, it's a struggle about the management of civilian casualties. That's the core. Why are we fighting in a paradoxical way, either to increase or decrease civilian casualties? Because if we take a step back, and this is how I would reframe it just a little bit, it's a struggle for legitimacy. That's what the most asymmetric wars are about. And what's legitimate for each side. For the weaker side, in this case the Palestinian side, it is all about capturing the legitimate attention of the international community, making themselves legitimate in the eyes of the international community. And for the stronger state, for Israel, it's defending itself against what you and I would both agree are not existential threats. Nothing any militia can do threatens the existence of the state, but nevertheless, it can inflict significant punishment. So it's defending itself in a way that is conceived of as legitimate by the international community. It's a struggle for legitimacy.
And the thing is, and that's where I agree, that fundamentally the Goldstone report got misinterpreted exactly what the strategies were on each side. Therefore they couldn't even understand at the first base not only the norms, but how the war operated.
I think what Goldstone missed the change in the nature of warfare, number one. Goldstone missed the strategies that each side use in asymmetrical warfare. Two, Goldstone missed the politics that shape these strategies in both societies. Three, and Goldstone missed that this is a struggle for legitimacy that is being fought out through counting casualties. And interestingly, no just war theory ever counted casualties.
Well, Michael Walzer, our great guru on this, we both
agree.
Think he's terrific. Really thinks the rule of proportionality is no longer relevant. I sort of don't want to throw out the proportionality. You're more inclined to agree with them, I think.
Well, I agree with both of you.
Okay,
all
tell
right?
us.
I'll tell you why I agree with both of you. The reason Michael Walzer wants to eliminate the discussion of proportionality, because that rule says that you can inflict only the number of casualties that are necessary to achieve a value target on the battlefield. Well, you and I would both know that that calculus is frankly impossible to do. It's probably impossible to value the target. And it's, to give you a concrete example, if you have information, intelligence information, that there is a suicide bomber who is embedded in a camp, and that suicide bomber is planning an action, how do you estimate the number of people that suicide bomber will kill? 1, 5, 20, 40, 50? And how do you know whether killing 20 people in that camp is worth preventing the deaths of 60 or 70 others when you have unknowns on both sides of the equation? How do you do this moral calculus? So that's where I understand what Michael Walzer is saying. But I agree with you that it's not the answer that matters, it's the question. So when you have platoon commanders and unit commanders, because the really interesting thing, and you made this point, is that these decisions are being pushed down to the lowest possible level. So when you have platoon commanders saying, is it proportional to what I want to achieve when I have to kill these numbers of civilians? Even if he can't answer the question, merely asking changes the way they fight on the battlefield.
With that comment, we'll have to end it. Thank you very much again, Janice. You're terrific as usual.